The saga of Henry Ford, founder of the Ford Motor Company and a pivotal figure who revolutionized the industrial landscape, begins on a tranquil farm in Dearborn, Michigan. Born in 1863, young Henry gave little indication that he would become an icon. However, the inquisitive boy who delighted in taking apart mechanical devices would one day transform mass production and make automobiles accessible to millions of average Americans. From an early age, Ford possessed a keen interest in how things worked. At just 13, he ingeniously crafted his own working watch from discarded metal components, quickly gaining a reputation in his neighborhood for his clock repair skills. For Ford, machines were more than just tools. They were a means of comprehending the world and escaping the conventional farming life that was expected of him. In 1879, at the age of 16, Ford left the farm and ventured to Detroit to work as a machinist. Although Detroit was not yet the automotive capital of America, it was a thriving industrial center. His initial position at James F. Lauer and Brothers offered meager pay, but Ford recognized it as an invaluable learning opportunity, eagerly absorbing knowledge about engines, mechanical systems, and the generation of energy. Over the subsequent decade, he honed his skills as a machinist and engineer, eventually securing employment at the Edison Illuminating Company. It was during this period that the first major turning point in his life emerged. By 1893, after years of hard work and dedication, Ford earned promotion to chief engineer. While the increased salary was certainly welcome, it was the newfound time and financial stability that truly mattered. These resources allowed him to pursue his burning passion, the construction of a gasoline-powered engine, a technology still in its infancy. Burning the midnight oil, Ford tirelessly worked on prototypes in a small workshop located behind his home. By 1896, he had successfully completed the quadricycle, his very first automobile, a rudimentary machine featuring 4 bicycle wheels, a 2-cylinder engine, and a top speed of 20 miles per hour. Although basic in design, it represented a major breakthrough. It proved that Ford possessed the ability to translate ideas into tangible reality, and more importantly, that the automobile didn't have to be a luxury accessible only to the wealthy. But Ford's path was not without its setbacks. His first automotive venture, the Detroit Automobile Company, ultimately failed due to high production costs and unreliable vehicles. Nevertheless, Ford remained resolute. He firmly believed that the problem lay not in the concept itself, but in the production methods employed. He envisioned building cars not for the elite, but for the masses, affordable, dependable, and easily reparable. Driven by this vision, he continued to experiment, and in 1903, with investment from 12 shareholders, including himself, he established the Ford Motor Company. This pivotal moment marked the dawn of an industrial revolution that few could have foreseen. From the outset, Ford laser-focused on efficiency and cost reduction. In 1908, he introduced a Model T, the car that would catapult him to global fame. With a price tag of just $825, significantly more affordable than his competitors, the Model T captured the imagination of the American public. It was durable, user-friendly, and capable of navigating the rough, unpaved rural roads of the time. Demand soared. The Ford Motor Company experienced exponential growth, but Henry Ford's ambition was far from satisfied. He recognized that to truly bring automobiles to every household in America, he needed to drastically reduce production costs. This realization led to the most significant innovation of his career, the moving assembly line. Ford's implementation of the assembly line revolutionized not only the automotive industry, but the entire landscape of manufacturing. By assigning each worker a single repetitive task, he dramatically increased the speed of production while simultaneously lowering overall costs. It was a transformative concept, one that fundamentally reshaped the modern industrial world. Part 1 concludes here, with Henry Ford poised to forever alter global industry. As Ford Motor Company entered the 1910s, Henry Ford was on the cusp of a chapter that would redefine the world, transforming the automobile from a luxury item for the wealthy into a mass-market necessity for the average citizen. The linchpin of this transformation was the moving assembly line, arguably one of the greatest industrial innovations of the 20th century. Prior to Ford, assembling a car required skilled manual labor and extensive time. Workers constructed vehicles from the ground up, resulting in high expenses and limited production. However, Henry Ford envisioned a new paradigm. I will build a motor car for the great multitude, so affordable that a man of ordinary means can own one. To realize this vision, he recognized the need to overhaul the entire production process. After studying shipyards, meatpacking plants, and various other industrial operations, he conceived of a moving production methodology where the product came to the worker rather than the other way around. Each worker would perform a single task repeatedly as the car moved along a conveyor past their station. In 1913, Ford implemented the moving assembly line at his Highland Park plant. The results were nothing short of revolutionary. The time required to build a Model T plummeted from over 12 hours to a mere 1 hour and 33 minutes. This breakthrough propelled Ford Motor Company to become a global powerhouse. With unprecedented production speed, Ford slashed the price of the Model T from $825 to $360. The more cars he produced, the cheaper they became. And the cheaper they became, the greater the demand. The Model T quickly became a defining symbol of modern America, a car for farmers, laborers, shop owners, and even women, whose mobility was greatly enhanced by Ford's invention. By 1914, Ford realized that efficiency alone was not enough. To sustain production, he needed a stable and dedicated workforce. This led to his groundbreaking policy. The now famous $5 a day wage doubled the prevailing industry standard. He also reduced working hours to 8 per day and instituted a 3-shift system. Thousands flocked to Detroit, and worker turnover decreased dramatically. However, the policy was not solely altruistic. Ford understood that well-compensated workers were not only more productive, but also became potential customers who could afford the very cars they manufactured. This created a self-sustaining economic cycle. Satisfied workers led to higher productivity, which resulted in cheaper cars, increased sales, and ultimately sustained profits. Yet, Ford's control over his empire was far from benevolent. His authoritarian tendencies manifested through the Ford Sociological Department, which monitored employees' private lives to ensure moral conduct. Those found engaging in activities such as drinking, gambling, or living improperly risked losing their bonuses or even their jobs. Critics accused Ford of intruding on personal freedoms. Even though the policy demonstrably reduced absenteeism and increased overall efficiency. Despite these controversies, Ford's dominance continued to grow. By the mid-1910s, Ford Motor Company was responsible for producing over 40% of all cars worldwide. Detroit transformed into a bustling industrial capital. New neighborhoods, schools, and businesses flourished, all fueled by Ford's economic engine. During World War I, Ford garnered even more attention. Although initially advocating for peace, once the U.S. entered the war, he shifted to manufacturing military equipment, including truck engines, aircraft engines, and other wartime machinery. By 1918, more than half the cars in America were Model Ts. But then came a new challenge. Ford was too attached to his own creation. While competitors such as General Motors offered colorful, stylish, and feature-rich automobiles, Ford stubbornly insisted on keeping the Model T virtually unchanged. His philosophy was famously encapsulated as, "You can have any color you want, as long as it's black." For a time, the stubbornness proved successful. However, society was rapidly evolving. Consumers desired cars that were not only inexpensive, but also aesthetically pleasing, comfortable, and customizable. Ford, however, refused to adapt. This marked the beginning of a prolonged struggle, one that would ultimately reshape Henry Ford's place in the very industry he had created. By the dawn of the 1910s, the world was changing at an unprecedented pace, and Henry Ford stood at the epicenter of this transformation. The Model T had already cemented its status as the first automobile truly intended for the average American, but Ford believed that merely building a car was not sufficient. The challenge ahead was far more significant. He sought to fundamentally redesign the nature of work, production, and affordability. To him, the automobile should not be a luxury. It should be a symbol of freedom accessible to any hardworking citizen. What Ford initiated next would not only redefine manufacturing, but would also reverberate across every industry on Earth. The key idea was one that engineers had debated for years: the moving assembly line. While Ford did not invent the concept outright, he was the first to implement on a massive scale in automobile production. His inspiration came from studying diverse industries, ranging from meatpacking and breweries to even watchmakers. The underlying principle was simple. By dividing a complex task into numerous smaller steps and assigning each person a specific, repetitive action, the overall production speed could be dramatically increased. In 1913, Ford introduced a moving assembly line at the Highland Park factory. It was a revolutionary sight to behold. Workers stood stationary while components moved along conveyors to them. Instead of assembling an entire car from start to finish, each worker tightened a bolt, installed a wheel, adjusted a part, or performed a precise motion dozens of times per hour. Productivity skyrocketed. A Model T that previously took more than 12 hours to assemble could now be completed in roughly 90 minutes. Costs plummeted, and Ford passed these savings directly to the customers. The price of a new Model T dropped from approximately $825 in 1908 to less than $300 by the mid-1920s. At a time when many American workers earned only around $20 a week, this change was nothing short of revolutionary. Car ownership ceased to be a privilege of the wealthy. It became an attainable goal for farmers, machinists, clerks, and young families dreaming of greater mobility. Ford's ambition to put the world on wheels was rapidly becoming a reality. But Ford's innovations extended beyond mere production speed. In 1914, he announced the unforgettable $5 workday, doubling the standard wage in industry. News of this unprecedented pay spread like wildfire across the globe. Thousands flocked to Detroit. Immigrants, factory workers, and unemployed men alike, all hoping for a chance to earn this generous salary. Critics accused Ford of destabilizing labor markets, but he viewed the decision differently. He believed that well-paid workers would become loyal employees, stable family providers, and, crucially, customers capable of buying the very cars they helped to build. The policy not only attracted workers, but also fostered unprecedented loyalty and stability. Turnover and absenteeism decreased significantly, while productivity soared. Ford grasped a truth that few industrialists of his time fully appreciated. Human dignity had quantifiable economic value. Yet, these innovations were not without their controversies. The assembly line, while efficient, could be monotonous and mentally draining. Workers complained about repetitive tasks, constant supervision, and the relentless pace of the moving machinery. Some labor historians later criticized Ford for dehumanizing factory work, transforming skilled craftsmen into narrowly specialized laborers. Ford, however, remained convinced that the benefits outweighed the drawbacks. Higher wages, shorter hours, and job security, he believed, justified the structured environment. During the same period, Henry Ford continued to shape American transportation culture. He championed the construction of better roads, reasoning that automobiles would be useless without drivable surfaces. He advocated for improved rural connectivity, viewing the automobile as a tool that bridged distances and alleviated isolation. Farmers could reach markets more easily, families could explore new towns, and emergencies could be handled more swiftly. The Model T transcended its status as a mere machine, becoming a symbol of independence and freedom. Ford's influence extended beyond manufacturing and transportation. He ventured into political commentary, social experiments, and even newspaper ownership. His weekly publication featured controversial viewpoints, including articles that drew significant criticism. These opinions would later tarnish his public image, but at the time, they reflected his conviction that industrial success afforded him the authority to comment on national issues. Meanwhile, Ford Motor Company continued its global expansion. New factories opened in Europe, South America, and Canada. Ford believed that his vehicles could uplift societies worldwide by providing mobility and economic opportunity. In many regions, the Model T represented the first automobile people had ever seen in person. By the early 1920s, Henry Ford had risen to become one of the most powerful industrialists in the world. His vast wealth was directly linked to America's economic engine, and his production methods had reshaped global manufacturing. However, such monumental success created new pressures. Competitors such as General Motors began experimenting with annual model updates, diverse color options, and more luxurious features. Consumer tastes were evolving. demanding variety rather than standardization. Ford, however, remained stubbornly attached to the Model T. His unwavering belief in its simplicity and affordability led him to resist innovation longer than many advisors deemed wise. This inflexibility would sow the seeds of future challenges. But at this stage of his life, Ford stood near the pinnacle of his influence. He had transformed American society, improved the lives of working-class families, and built a company that epitomized modern industrial power. What lay ahead would test his adaptability, his vision, and his comprehension of a world that was changing more rapidly than he anticipated. By the mid-1920s, the Ford empire stood as a towering edifice, but cracks were beginning to appear beneath its seemingly impenetrable foundation. Henry Ford, the man who had revolutionized manufacturing and empowered countless working-class families, now faced an unexpected adversary: time itself. The world was evolving at a pace that outstripped his willingness to adapt. Consumer preferences were shifting, competitors were innovating, and the very simplicity that had once made the Model T iconic now threatened to transform it into an antiquated relic. General Motors, under the leadership of Alfred Sloan, introduced a strategy that Ford had never deemed necessary: yearly model updates, a spectrum of color choices, and cars designed not merely as functional tools, but as personal symbols of identity and status. GM's vehicles were more elegant, more modern, and increasingly more desirable. Their message was clear: people wanted change, not the same product year after year. Ford, however, remained steadfast in his belief that the Model T's affordability and durability were unmatched, and that consumers would ultimately prioritize practicality over style. But reality painted a different picture. Sales began to decline. Customers were clamoring for something new. Dealers pleaded for updated models, smoother engines, and improved comfort. Even Ford's closest confidants warned him that the company needed to adapt to the changing times. The aging Model T, beloved as it was, could not stem the tide of innovation indefinitely. Henry Ford resisted until the 11th hour. He was famously stubborn. Some would characterize him as brilliantly determined, others as dangerously inflexible. But eventually, even he had to confront the truth. In 1927, after producing over 15 million Model Ts, Ford officially ceased its production. It was the end of an era. Workers at the Highland Park plant reportedly wept as the final vehicles rolled off the assembly line, aware that they were witnessing conclusion of one of the most significant industrial chapters in history. Now came the daunting task of reinventing the company. The world watched with bated breath to see if Ford could create a successor worthy of the Model T's legacy. Behind closed factory doors, engineers worked feverishly on what would become the next major leap forward: the Ford Model A. Unlike its predecessor, the Model A boasted improved styling, greater comfort, and more modern engineering. For the first time, Ford conceded to offering multiple colors, a symbolic acknowledgement that the world had indeed changed. When the Model A was unveiled in late 1927, it was an instant sensation. Crowds thronged showrooms. Orders far exceeded expectations. Ford had proven that he could still shape the automobile market, provided he was willing to evolve with it. But even as the Model A revitalized the company's fortunes, the man behind the empire was undergoing changes that few anticipated. Henry Ford was aging, and his son, Edsel Ford, had begun to assume a more active role in the company's leadership. Edsel possessed a different temperament than his father: artistic, gentle, patient, and receptive to innovation. He championed design, luxury, and refinement, values that resonated more strongly with contemporary consumers. Many historians contend that Edsel's vision played a crucial role in saving Ford Motor Company during these transitional years. Yet, Henry often overshadowed his son, reversing his decisions, dismissing new ideas, and interfering with design plans. The tension between father and son intensified, although Edsel remained loyal, determined to uphold a family legacy. During this period, Ford faced another formidable challenge: the rise of labor unions. The Ford factories were known for having some of the most stringent working conditions in the country. The sociological department, established under Henry's direction, monitored workers' personal lives, spending habits, and moral behavior. While intended to foster stability and reduce turnover, these practices increasingly felt intrusive and authoritarian. As the automobile workforce became more organized nationwide, the Ford empire emerged as a focal point of unionization efforts. The conflict reached a boiling point in 1937 during the infamous Battle of the Overpass, where Ford's private security forces violently clashed with union organizers from the United Auto Workers. Photographs from the event sent shockwaves across the nation. Public opinion began to turn against Ford, viewing him not as a benevolent industrial pioneer he once was, but as a powerful figure resisting workers' rights. Meanwhile, the Great Depression had crippled America's economy. Car sales plummeted, and even the mighty Ford Motor Company was not immune to its effects. Henry Ford, however, refused to lay off workers, opting instead to reduce working hours to distribute the limited jobs across the workforce. While well-intentioned, this approach placed a significant strain on the company's finances. Competitors adapted more swiftly to the economic downturn, while Ford struggled to reconcile its large workforce with diminished production. As economic pressures mounted, Edsel Ford worked tirelessly to modernize the company, introducing new designs, streamlining factories, and adopting cutting-edge technologies. Henry, however, remained deeply involved, questioning decisions and impeding reforms. Still, together they managed to stabilize the company long enough to develop another significant release, the Ford V8, introduced in 1932. It was affordable, powerful, and technologically advanced for its time. Criminals and law enforcement alike admired it for its speed and reliability. The V8 helped keep Ford competitive, although the company continued to trail GM in overall market share. By the late 1930s, Henry Ford's reputation had become increasingly complex. He was admired for his innovations, but criticized for his social views, resistance to unions, and authoritarian management style. Yet, despite these controversies, the Ford name remained one of the most recognizable symbols of American industry. As the world edged closer to another global conflict, World War II, Ford's factories would soon take on a new and vital purpose. But before this transformation commenced, the Ford family would experience a tragedy that would forever alter the course of the company. As the 1940s approached, the Ford empire stood on the precipice of transformation. The world was rapidly descending into global conflict, and the industrial landscape was poised to change in ways that no one could fully foresee. Henry Ford, though aging and increasingly detached from the day-to-day operations of the company, still exerted a nearly mythical influence. However, the true weight of leadership fell upon his son, Edsel Ford. Edsel had dedicated years to navigating precarious balance between his father's staunch traditionalism and the company's urgent need for modernization. His vision for Ford Motor Company was sophisticated and forward-thinking. Stylish automobiles, innovative engineering, and a more employee-centric corporate structure. Under his guidance, the company gradually recovered from the Great Depression and positioned itself for a new era. But the relentless pressures of leadership, the constant friction with his father, and the immense strain of guiding an industrial behemoth took a heavy toll on Edsel's health. By 1943, he was utterly exhausted, physically and emotionally. That year, tragedy struck. Edsel Ford passed away at the age of 49, leaving the company bereft of its steady, gentle guiding hand. Henry Ford was utterly devastated. For the first time, the man who had always seemed indestructible appeared vulnerable. His grief was overwhelming, and in his sorrow, he made a decision that shocked the nation. At the age of 80, he reassumed direct control of Ford Motor Company. But the world that Henry Ford returned to was no longer the same world that he had helped to create. The automotive industry had undergone a dramatic evolution, and World War II imposed technical, logistical, and political demands far exceeding the company's previous challenges. Yet, Ford's factories became indispensable to the Allied war effort, not because of Henry's recent leadership, but because of the organizational systems that he had painstakingly built decades earlier. Under government contracts, Ford commenced the production of military equipment, including engines, jeeps, armored vehicles, and most famously the B-24 Liberator bombers. At the Willow Run plant, Ford engineers applied assembly line principles to aircraft production. It was an unparalleled achievement. By 1944, the plant was churning out one bomber every 63 minutes, a pace that astounded military strategists. The same efficiency that had once made automobiles accessible to the masses now played a vital role in securing victory in the largest war the world had ever witnessed. Yet, even as the factories roared with wartime activity, Henry Ford's health and decision-making abilities deteriorated rapidly. His memory faltered, his judgment weakened, and executives quietly feared that the company could collapse without strong leadership. When the war drew to a close in 1945, Ford Motor Company found itself at a critical juncture. The solution emerged from the next generation, Henry Ford II, Edsel's son. Young, energetic, and trained in modern management techniques, he embodied everything the company desperately needed. But Henry Ford, the elder, was reluctant to relinquish control. After months of persuasion from a board of directors, the U.S. government and the Ford family, he finally relented. In September 1945, Henry Ford II assumed the presidency of the company, heralding the dawn of a new era. Under fresh leadership, Ford Motor Company underwent rapid modernization. Military contracts were replaced by civilian automotive development. New designs, new management structures, and new partnerships transformed the company into an efficient, competitive giant. Many historians credit Henry Ford II with effectively rescuing the company from potential collapse, an accomplishment that honored the foundation that his grandfather had established. During his final years, Henry Ford retreated to a life of quiet reflection. He spent more time at his Fair Lane estate, strolling through the gardens, feeding the wildlife, and occasionally visiting the Rouge plant to observe the next generation of engineering in action. Those who encountered him in his later years described a man who had transitioned from a fiery industrialist to a contemplative elder, a man both proud of and humbled by the vast legacy that he had created. On April 7, 1947, at the age of 83, Henry Ford passed away at his home. His death marked the end of one of the most extraordinary lives in American history. More than simply the founder of a car company, he was a transformative force who reshaped the world. He democratized mobility, making it accessible to the working class. He revolutionized manufacturing with the moving assembly line. He transformed consumer culture, influencing how people lived and worked. He laid the groundwork for the modern industrial economy. But Ford's legacy is not without its complexities. He was brilliant yet stubborn, visionary yet flawed, generous yet controlling. His influence on society was immense, both in the opportunities that he created and the controversies that he ignited. And perhaps it is this very complexity that makes his story so enduring. Henry Ford was more than just an inventor or a tycoon. He was a symbol of America's own dramatic transformation. Today, every moving assembly line, every affordable automobile, and every modern factory owes a debt to the ideas that Henry Ford brought into the world. His vision lives on not as a static monument, but as a constantly evolving system, just as the world itself continues to change around us.